I have an 11-year-old child. When he was 6 months old, he cried a lot. At no point in him crying could me and his mother have been like, you know what, let's just lock him in the room and leave him in there for a while because I don't consent to dealing with this anymore. Like, this is done, right? You leave him in there, he starves to death, it's like, okay, we're done with that. There exists an obligation where that child has a right to your resources. Now, the easy counter here is like, well, okay, but you could give him up for adoption or do something else, and I would agree with you, but that's why that case is a little bit special. It's not that de facto guardianship like the child falling into the water, because in here, other people could take on the burden, but for the pregnancy, there's only one person that has the ability to provide for that child that's growing in the womb, if indeed you consider it to be a person. Yeah, and I don't think the idea, you can't just withdraw consent when you've already engaged in an activity that more or less has you consenting to whatever the natural conclusion of that arc would be, save for it being, like you ended up dying or something, right? If I agreed to take a bunch of children with me to a camping trip and I drive there and, an hour, driving down, I'm like, you guys are fucking annoying. And then I just like kick them all in my car and I drive back. And the parents are like, what happened? You're like, well, I stopped consenting halfway through the ride. I think that they'd be like, okay, well, you can't do that. You're kind of there until the end. You can't just drop them off midway through, I would say.
So what you're saying is that once you consent to the act that precipitates the consequences, you can't then ever stop consenting. So like if I take somebody home and we start to have sex, I can't stop at some point?
The difference there is that on that particular exchange, and I've noticed there's a lot of abortion analogies that kind of do this.
By the way,
yeah?
I'm not a fan of any abortion analogy. I don't think anything is truly analogous to the situation.
Sure, but
and they're all
I
fail.
understand. It's interesting that there are some that I see why they sound compelling. So in Judith Thompson's paper,
Yeah.
She gives the analogy of like, what if I put all these bars in front of my window to keep a burglar out and he breaks in anyway, and now he's in my house. Am I obligated? Do I have to consent to the burglar staying here even though I used protection or try to keep him out? The problem with a lot of these analogies, like the one you gave with the consensual sex, is on the other end of that transaction, there is a moral agent that could choose otherwise. So when it comes to consenting sex with somebody, well, if I'm in a consensual sexual relationship and I'm like, hold on, stop, for that person to continue going requires an immoral decision made by another person. But for the same reason why I can't shoot a child that stumbles into my house, the same way that I might be able to shoot a burglar that stumbles into my house, I would say the child doesn't have the agency to understand the choice of what he's doing, whereas the burglar does. A fetus inside the womb doesn't have the agency to say like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I'll stop aggressing on you. It's doing the only thing that it possibly can.
Well, in Texas, in some places, you can shoot a child if they break into your house, but we'll set that aside for whether that should be the case some other day, which I would say no. But this issue of, sorry, I got mildly distracted there for a second.
Think about shooting kids?
No.
Yeah, I hate them too. Okay, so no, I was talking.
No, it's, if I have, I started off by at one point saying that consent.
Basically saying you can't withdraw consent when the fetus can't choose otherwise.
I don't understand if we have a system where there are ways in which for an individual to withdraw consent, why we say or why you're basically arguing for you can withdraw consent to here and then you have to stop, because you said you'd agree. I'm not suggesting this is a realistic thing. You could give your child up for adoption. You could. And we have systems in place for that. They're awful systems. In most cases, kids are probably going to be better even in, I hate to say it, moderately terrible homes than they are in the systems. But that means we need to fix the systems, and we should probably fix the parents, but that's a different discussion. On this, at the end of the day, I don't know how personhood solves a problem with the bodily autonomy argument if what we're going to say is, once you've had sex, no matter how you had it, as long as it was consensual at all, you can't then remove consent to remaining pregnant. So there's a risk to becoming pregnant, and that comes with some ways to alleviate that risk or eliminate that risk. That's abortion is one of them.
It's a little begging the question, I think, because if we're arguing whether abortion should be okay. We're not saying like, well, it's okay to do it because you can get an abortion, because that's like the subject of the.
No. Right? We're talking about the moral responsibility of someone engaging in an act with certain consequences.
Yeah.
You don't get to eliminate the fact that there are options for those consequences.
Yeah, but we're arguing over whether those options are murder, essentially. Which I believe, if it's a person, I think it is a murder, basically. If you grant that it's a person, you're essentially murdering the person to save the mother from whatever inconvenience pregnancy would grant.
Well, it's not a person. I mean, it's not a person, and it's not murder.
Well, if it's not a person, then I'm totally on board with you. I agree. Like
murder is a legal construct, and awesome. Murder is a specific legal construct that is not simply anything that results in the death of a person.
Sure, I'm sorry. When I say murder, I'm so sorry. I'll clarify anytime I say, because I understand. We go
I have to push back on that, though, because that's the buzzword from
That is true. When I say
anti-choice
murder, I'm always in, we're still in the realm of ethics. When I say murder, I'm speaking about the unjustified killing of another person.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. Sorry.
And my view of this is that it is an unfortunate consequence of biology that the justified act and perhaps necessary act of terminating pregnancy can result in the death of a fetus. That doesn't make it an unjustified act against another person.
Why, yeah, the only reason why I would view it as an unjustified act is because if you are engaging in an act where you're consenting to the possibility of a life appearing, you have, I believe, a de facto guardianship, an obligation to that life to see it through at the very least until somebody else can take over that guardianship.
Wow. So, unless, of course, you were a rape victim.
I would say you would, if you grant personhood,
then we don't care about the person.
Even for rape victims, you would have to say yes. Rape victims, incest, all of those. Unless there's a threat to the life of the mother, because now we're fundamentally weighing medical options and not just like, can I kill something because it's very inconvenient.
Can I kill something? This is about terminating a pregnancy. And in the future, there may be ways to terminate a pregnancy that don't necessarily result in the death of a fetus at that particular time.
Potentially.
But that's the biological fact right now. And so what we seem to be saying is, if you view it as a person, anybody who gets pregnant is just screwed. You no longer have control over your body. Everybody else in society who disagrees with you about whether or not you should have control of your body is going to take control of your body.
And every man that pays child support knows this for 18 years. That's unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, there are obligations that we have as like humans, I think, to other people sometimes, especially to children. And there is an obligation that exists there. You can't just abort the obligation. If a mother decides to have a child and you're a father and you pay child support until the child turns of age, like I think that is an obligation that, one, we already have a legal precedent for, but aside from that, we already have moral precedent for. And then I don't think you can just erase that while acknowledging that the fetus is a human. That precedent is huge.
And yet you can. Because even if it's a human, if it's in there writing poetry and curing cancer, it shouldn't have a right to use your body without your consent.
Okay, so I'm going to reference. Okay, so here's a question I have. Okay, so going back to this 2013 paper by the Steve Wagner guy, he posits Mary's cabin. So a woman wakes up and she finds out that she is in a blizzard. She's locked in a cabin for 6 weeks, and she'd just given birth to a baby. She wakes up, she looks over for everything, finds a note, and it says, "Listen, your child is in another place and it's safe. There's another child in another room. You have all the food and supplies that you need, but for 6 weeks, you're going to be locked in this cabin, and that baby's with you. You're there. We'll let you out in 6 weeks. Everything will be okay." In 6 weeks, the police show up to the house. They plow all the snow. They open the door. Mary comes out, and they say, "Oh my goodness, we've got you. The Association of Behavioral Psychologists kidnapped you for an experiment. We're so sorry. We're going to bring you out. How are you guys doing?" And she says, "I'm doing fine." And they're like, "Well, how's the baby?" And she says, "They're not here anymore." And the question is, what happened to the baby? And she says, "Oh, well, I let the baby starve. I didn't want to feed it." I'm like, well, you had all the means and opportunity to. You were the only one that could have. The question is did she have an obligation to provide nourishment for the child while she was there and the only one that could? And I feel like this is a closer analogy to pregnancy than the violin argument, because you are the only one that could provide nourishment to that child for those 6 weeks. Couldn't be any random person's kidney there. You have the ability to do it. We would have to breastfeed, right? So it's some obligation to your body to use it in a way that's like kind of natural. Breastfeeding is more natural than hooking people's kidneys up to each other. And I feel like when most people look at this, and I am relying a bit on moral intuition here, I do admit, but I'm looking at this de facto guardianship idea. I don't think most people would be comfortable saying like, well, it's not her kid, and yeah, if she really wanted to just kind of chill there and let the kid starve, it's okay because that kid doesn't have a right to her body. I think people would say, well, in that case, she's the only one that can provide it. She does have not just a moral, virtuous action, but like an actual moral duty, a moral obligation there to provide for the safety and the nourishment of that child. And you can pick that apart if you want. You go.
Sure. This is one I've heard before, although it's been a little while. To me, this is exactly the same as the swimming pool thing, where provided there is no undue burden on that person that puts them at risk, then yes, I think they have a moral duty to do that. And to shirk that moral duty, we can hold them morally responsible. Whether or not we can hold them legally responsible is another issue.
Sure.
And as I said probably 5 times, I care more about the legal thing than the moral.
Sure.
But this is why, by and large, when somebody says, hey, you want to debate abortion, my 2 answers are, A, I don't care to debate the morality of it ever.
Sure.
And B, I'd rather it wasn't 2 dudes just for the optics. It doesn't matter how good either of us arguments. And by the way, it's an everybody issue. This is not a woman's issue. This is not a person with a uterus issue. This is everybody's issue. But from an optics standpoint, let's be clear. I mean, we're one step removed from debating, whether or not black people and women get to vote at this point, with the two of us kind of sitting
That's
up there.
That's my 2 o'clock.
Yeah. You can have that one. I'll debate Islam later today. So while I would agree that there is definitely moral duty, it's not always easy to figure out where the limits of that moral duty are.
I agree.
And it's not relevant to whether or not especially relevant to whether or not we should hold people legally responsible and grant people the right to seek that remedy. And so, yeah, the analogies of, hey, there's a baby drowning, you should probably save it. I used to use a kid standing in front of a bus and there's a bus coming, but it's coming really slowly where even after having a triple bypass last December, I could still reach out and pull the kid in. I would be a moral monster not to save that kid. And everybody on the planet would have a right to look at me and say, you are one of the most disgusting people ever. How could you do that? And yet it's still an issue of my bodily autonomy and whether or not I'm going to put myself at risk. The cabin one, and let's just be as charitable as possible about it and say there's no extenuating circumstances. She just decided for no good reason, nah, I'm not going to do that. Then I would say she's immoral. But that does not mean that when you are saddled with the duty of taking care of someone else, that becomes a legal viability.
Gotcha.
And that's the only distinction.
Okay.
Bodily autonomy, by the way, and this is maybe one of many reasons, but one of the reasons why we're in disagreement about the bodily autonomy thing, because bodily autonomy, I don't give a shit about morality with this argument. It's absolutely nothing but what rights and freedoms individuals have in a society. And the personhood argument is close. The personhood argument kind of walks the line to me, where it's like, it wants to tug on the heartstrings of, this is a person and we should value it, which I have no problem valuing it. I have a niece and nephew. I have family. My partner and I like to have kids, despite the fact that they're awful. And I don't know, whether Bill Hicks said you don't exist until you're in my phone book, I think. But all of those things are things that I like. But the other thing that I value is individuals' freedoms and autonomy. And when we start saying, I'm going to tell you what you can do with your body and what you can't, I have a big problem with that. And we're doing that for abortion. The question is the reason good enough? And once again, I'm sorry, but I'm back to the legal issue, which is the only one I really cared about.
Sure.
If there was a moral responsibility, does that mean we should legislate it? Because I'm not convinced.
Well, so maybe we're a little nebulous still on the moral thing, but I think that we kind of agree in that maybe the only part of our disagreement is like, what is like an undue burden, or what is a sacrifice, right? If you were to ask me, a child is 1,000 yards out at sea and they're going to drown unless you swim out and save it. Obviously, I'm going to say, well, you don't have an obligation there because that would be represent a great risk to yourself.
I couldn't swim 1,000 yards, so we're good there.
Yeah. Whereas if the child like slips into the pool right next to you and you're just watching it kind of drown at the stair and you're kind of poking at it, right? It's not good, right? You obviously have an obligation there. So maybe the difference is like, well, what is the burden, and at what point is it like, well, if pregnancy lasted, 3 days and then it came out happy and healthy, abortion is probably wrong. But if pregnancy lasted like 11 years, would you say that somebody who gets pregnant on day 1 now has to carry this 11-year child to term? So maybe there's like room in the middle there for like, what is like too much of a burden to value the life on the other side. The reason why I think it's interesting to deal with the legal aspect of it, though, is I've listened to a lot of you talk about abortion, but I don't know if you're like a libertarian or anything. I have no idea.
There are things I agree with libertarians on.
Okay.
But I generally find libertarians to be largely selfish assholes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I guess when I'm looking at this from a broader societal perspective, I'm thinking like, what do I want to codify into law? It feels like for human civilization to flourish, to not just survive, but to flourish, there has to be some level of integration and cooperation with ourselves. And part of that integration and cooperation is entitling people to other people's resources in a way that kind of sort of violates the autonomy of a person. Like, I think it's Chris Rock had a joke where it's like, you work Monday and Tuesday for the government, basically, because that's where your taxes come from. And there are ways where, the libertarian will argue the government is stealing money from you when they take it out of your paycheck. But then, my response would be, well, as part of the agreement of living in a society that's functioning and flourishing as it is, we all kind of owe part of our autonomy to that society. That no man is truly an island, and no man can truly act as an island, because there are certain types of special obligations we have, not only to the people around us, but especially to our children, to ensure that society continues to function as it does. And that's why I would say, like, some of those things actually do need to be legal rights. Parents should not have the right to get lazy and let their children starve. You should not have the right to, I guess, if you consider like a fetus a human, to kill that fetus because you just want to, if you consider it a human.
I think I agree with all that except for one word, and that was where you stuck in the word autonomy, where I would have put the word resources, because I don't think I have to ever give up any of my autonomy to anybody. Resources, yeah, that's the cooperative cost of the fact that we have to share space. What you do impacts me, what I do impacts you, even though till today we never even met. We've impacted each other both indirectly and to some extent directly, because people keep coming into my Twitch to say, when are you going to talk to Destiny? Yeah. But I don't think that involves me giving up any of my autonomy. What it may involve, and this may be one of the strengths of talking about moral virtues, is that I can consensually give up aspects of my autonomy on a regular basis. I was in the Navy for 8.5 years. I gave up my autonomy for those 8.5 years. I was government property, and I do not have the same rights as other citizens. To some extent you do. You can fight afterwards. My buddy here is nodding at me because he was also in. But, you could say, this is why we run around saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not oorah gung-ho. I did 8.5 years in the Navy, but I'm not a jingoist, and I'm not particularly fond of the military, although I don't have bad memories of it. But I definitely gave up my autonomy. But I did so voluntarily. And so when people come up and they say, thank you for your service, I laugh a little bit because my dad was in Vietnam and I was in the Gulf War, which meant I sat on an aircraft carrier, watched planes leave for 3 days and come back, bored out of my mind at no risk. And so when people say, thank you for your service, the only way it can make sense to me is that I gave up some of my autonomy and risked something, even though realistically, I was never at risk. I was more at risk in Haiti when there wasn't a war going on than anywhere else. But I think that's virtuous. I don't think there's a duty to give up the autonomy.
Okay. I guess I'll ask, kind of one more analogy, and then I'll give you the response, and then we can do questions, because I think we're kind of at bedrock here. Let's say you open the door one day, and a crying baby is put in your porch. Okay, tugging at the heartstrings again. Okay, it can be an ugly baby if you want. Okay, crying ugly baby is put at your porch. You open the door, look around, nobody's there. I imagine you would say that in this case, at the very least, you have an obligation to bring the child inside, because it's not a great cost to yourself, right?
Unless the house is on fire, I'd bring it inside.
Yeah. So you bring the child inside, and now you've got this child, and then you start kind of like feeding it, providing nourishment. Let's say you call around, you can't find the parents for this child at all. Nobody seems to know where it came from. Child's maybe 1.5 years old. Maybe you can roll around a little bit. And eventually, let's say you call your local adoption agency, your local police. Nobody really has room for it. But if you want, you can stick it back out on your porch, and nobody's going to arrest you for it, I guess. Do you think there exists some kind of moral obligation here where it's like, well, you showed up here, you have the ability to provide for it, you're not going to starve or anything. You've got, it's going to suck. Maybe the budget will be a little bit tighter. But do you think a moral obligation exists there to take care of the child as you see it? And then I'll let you talk around that, and then we can do whatever.
Sure. So I'll say yes, but then I'm going to backtrack.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems. That's why I say I hate the analogy specifically around this. If I open my door and there's a baby on my porch, before I touch it or anything else, I'm calling 911.
Sure.
And I'm not going to feed it because I don't know what that baby's dietary restrictions or requirements are, or what it might be allergic to. That could be irresponsible. I'm not going to just look around for the parents or anything else, but I am going to call the authorities. And we've established some systems like that. I'm not just doing this, I promise. I know you don't know me. I'm not just doing this to completely knock the legs out from underneath this. What I'm doing it to make a point, and that is that we all of us, including me and Destiny, are guilty of making assumptions. And when we hear analogies, we assume things about the situation because we have a goal that we're going to, which is one of the reasons why I started this off by saying, I don't have a goal of saving abortion rights. I have a goal of protecting human rights. And it is consistent with my values on bodily autonomy that it also protects abortion rights. The issue of whether or not it's moral and whether it's a person, that you're going to get as many different answers on that as you are as many different answers on when personhood starts, everywhere from conception to phone book, if we go with Bill Hicks. And largely, while I find it interesting, and I've done a lot of moral debates, at the end of the day, I'm interested in protecting the right. But I would agree, just so people think I'm not dodging the question, if I walk out my door and there's a 1.5-year-old sitting there, I'm calling 911, and provided it's safer inside than it is outside, which is going to be the case most of the time in Texas, I'm bringing the kid inside, and then we're going to say, okay, I'll start with water at some point because that's going to be safe.
Okay.
And I do, in fact, have a moral duty, just as I do to everybody in this room were something like that to happen. It doesn't matter whether it's a baby or a fetus or a person. And this is why personhood isn't a thing for me for abortion.
Okay.